Get your hands off my kitchen!
Chef Vincent Calloway slammed the pan from Harrison's grip. Bernays splattered across the steel counter.
Baron was... Chef, the sauce was breaking.
You are a dishwasher!
You are a dishwasher. You scrub grease.
Vincent laughed loud enough for every cook to hear.
Humiliate. You want to cook?
He grabbed Harrison's apron and ripped it over his head. Buttons pinged off stainless steel.
You will never cook.
Harrison stood still. His grandmother's wooden spoon lay on the counter where it had fallen. No one in that kitchen knew what that spoon carried. They were all about to find out. Harrison Drake walked out the back door of Le Ciel with nothing but the clothes on his back and a wooden spoon in his pocket. No final paycheck. No goodbye from the 12 cooks who had watched him scrub their pots for 3 years. Just the sound of the heavy steel door slamming behind him and the low hum of the Manhattan night. He sat on the loading dock, feet hanging over the edge, and pulled out the spoon. The handle was dark from decades of use, the grain worn silk smooth by a woman who believed every meal was a conversation. Ruth Drake, his grandmother. The woman who raised him in a shotgun house outside Greenville, Mississippi, where the kitchen was the biggest room and the stove never went cold. Harrison was 6 the first time she put a knife in his hand. Not a toy. A real paring knife with a wooden handle that matched the spoon. "You hold it like this," she had said, folding his small fingers around the grip. "Gentle, like you're holding a baby bird. Tight enough it don't fly away, loose enough it can still breathe." She taught him everything. How to break down a chicken by feel alone. How to tell when oil was ready by the sound it made. A whisper meant too cold. A shout meant too hot. A steady conversation meant perfect. How to season without measuring, because measuring was for people who didn't trust their hands. By 12, Harrison could cook a full Sunday dinner for 15 without a recipe. Smoked ribs, collard greens with ham hock, cornbread from cast iron, sweet potato pie with a crust so flaky it crumbled if you looked at it wrong. The neighbors would line up on the porch before noon, folding chairs and paper plates, waiting for the screen door to swing open. Ruth died when Harrison was 19. Pancreatic cancer. Fast and cruel. She was stirring gumbo on a Tuesday and gone by Friday. The last thing she pressed into his hands was the leather-bound recipe book. 96 pages of her handwriting, some entries dating back to her own grandmother. Recipes with names like Monday Courage Soup and the Forgiveness Stew. Food that wasn't just food. Food that carried memory, apology, celebration, and grief in the same pot. Harrison left Mississippi 3 weeks after the funeral. He couldn't stay in the house. Every wall smelled like her. He took a bus to New York with $400, the recipe book, and the spoon. The city ate through his money in 2 months. He applied to 19 restaurants. Not one would let him near a stove. No degree, no culinary school, no references. Just a black kid from Mississippi with a leather book and a wooden spoon. Le Ciel hired him to wash dishes. Minimum wage plus scraps. He took it because it meant standing near a kitchen, and standing near a kitchen meant breathing the same air as the food. For 3 years, Harrison scrubbed. He scrubbed until the skin on his knuckles cracked and bled. He scrubbed sauté pans caked with fond, sheet trays black with caramelized sugar, stockpots heavy enough to buckle his knees. And every night, after the last cook clocked out and the lights dimmed to the blue glow of the exit signs, Harrison stayed. He cooked. He would pull ingredients from the discard bin. Bruised tomatoes, day-old bread, herb stems destined for the trash. And he would make something beautiful. A rustic tomato bisque with charred bread croutons. a chimichurri from stems that still held more flavor than most chefs' best leaves. Dishes his grandmother would have recognized, dressed in the language of fine dining, but rooted in the soil of Mississippi. He never told anyone. He cleaned up every trace before dawn. Or so he thought. Elena Whitfield noticed first. The sous chef had forgotten her knife roll one Tuesday night and come back around midnight. The kitchen was dark except for the blue flame of burner 6. Harrison stood over a cast-iron skillet, moving with a rhythm Elena had never seen in any cook at Le Ciel. Not rehearsed, not rigid, but fluid, instinctive. Like his body was listening to the food and responding in real time. She watched from the doorway for 4 minutes before he sensed her. He froze. "I can explain." "Don't." Elena stepped forward. She picked up the fork on the counter, cut into the seared duck breast he'd made from a portion marked for disposal, and put it in her mouth. She chewed slowly. Then she set the fork down and looked at him with an expression he couldn't read. "How long have you been doing this?" 3 years? Every night? Almost. Elena pulled out a chair and sat down. "Harrison, that duck is better than anything Vincent has put on the menu in 2 years. He didn't know what to say. No one had tasted his food since his grandmother died. The next evening at service, something strange happened. A foretop on the terrace sent back compliments on the béarnaise, the same sauce Harrison had adjusted before Vincent ripped his apron off. The server relayed it to Vincent, who paused, ladle in hand, and said nothing. He stared at the sauce as if it had betrayed him. He tasted it. His jaw tightened. He put the ladle down and didn't speak for the rest of service. That night, alone in his office, Vincent pulled up the kitchen security footage. He rewound to the moment Harrison had touched the pan. He watched Harrison's hands, the speed, the instinct, the correction that saved a sauce Vincent himself had failed to notice was dying. Vincent deleted the footage, but the taste stayed on his tongue. And doubt, once planted, is a seed that doesn't need sunlight to grow. Elena Whitfield showed up at Harrison's apartment 3 days after he was fired. It wasn't much of an apartment, a studio above a laundromat in Bed-Stuy, the ceiling so low he could touch it without stretching. She stood in the doorway, holding a brown envelope and a look that said she hadn't come to offer sympathy. "I found a truck," she said. Harrison stared at her. "A what?" "A food truck. My cousin's. He used it to sell empanadas until he moved to Portland. It's parked behind his mother's house in Red Hook. Needs new tires and a deep clean, but the grill works, and the fryer works, and the permit transfers." "Elena, I can't..." "You can't keep sitting here staring at that recipe book like it's going to cook itself." She dropped the envelope on his counter. Inside was the truck's registration and a handwritten note. "First month free. After that, we split costs. Elena." He named it Nana's Kitchen. He painted the sign himself, white letters on a deep blue background, the same shade as his grandmother's favorite apron. He parked it on a corner in Fort Greene, between a bodega and a barber shop, and opened for lunch on a Monday in March. 3 people came. A construction worker on break who ordered the smoked brisket sandwich and ate it standing up without saying a word. A woman pushing a stroller who wanted something quick and cheap. And an elderly woman named Dorothy who sat on the fold-out stool, took 1 bite of the collard greens, and started crying. "Baby," she said, grabbing Harrison's wrist through the window. "This tastes like my mother's kitchen in Alabama. How did you do that?" Harrison didn't have an answer. He just handed her a napkin and refilled her plate. By the second week, the line stretched past the barber shop. Word moved the way it always moves in Brooklyn. Not through advertisements or social media campaigns, but through taste. 1 person told 2. 2 told 6. 6 told everyone at church. The barbershop owner started sending his clients across the sidewalk. The bodega owner taped a handwritten sign in his window. Best food on this block, right arrow, that direction. By the third week, Philip Townsend found the truck. Townsend was a food blogger with 400,000 followers and a reputation for discovering talent before the critics did. He had eaten at every Michelin-starred restaurant in the city and written reviews that could fill a dining room or empty one overnight. He ordered 3 items, ate them on the curb, then walked back to the window. "Who trained you?" he asked. "My grandmother." "Where did she study?" "Her kitchen." Townsend published the article the next morning. The headline read, "The best soul food in New York City comes from a truck in Fort Greene, and the chef has never seen the inside of a culinary school." It went viral by noon. 40,000 shares, 600 comments. News outlets picked it up by evening. Vincent Calloway read it at his desk in Le Ciel, alone, at 11 at night. He read it twice. Then he closed his laptop and poured himself a glass of wine that he did not drink. The dishwasher. The kid who smelled like drain water. The nobody he had thrown out like a grease rag. That kid was being called the best soul food chef in New York. And the article mentioned Le Ciel, not as Harrison's training ground, but as the place that had failed to recognize genius standing 3 feet from its stove. Vincent did not call Harrison. He did not congratulate him. Instead, he picked up the phone and called the city's Department of Health. The first inspection came on a Thursday. 2 officials in white shirts and clipboards. They checked the fryer temperature, the hand wash station, the refrigeration log. Everything passed. Harrison kept the truck cleaner than most restaurant kitchens in Manhattan. Vincent called again. This time, a parking enforcement officer appeared and cited the truck for being 18 inches too close to a fire hydrant. Fine, $350. Harrison paid it and moved the truck 6 feet. A week later, another complaint. Then another. Anonymous tips about food safety, noise violations, unlicensed vending. Each one investigated, each one unfounded. But each one cost Harrison time, money, and sleep. The inspections multiplied. The fines stacked. His permit renewal was flagged for additional review. Elena traced one of the anonymous complaints back to an email registered under Le Ciel's business account. She showed Harrison the printout. He looked at it for a long time, then folded it and put it in his pocket. "Aren't you angry?" she asked. Angry doesn't cook food. The breaking point came on a Saturday morning. Harrison arrived to find his truck's service window smashed. Glass glittered across the sidewalk like scattered teeth. No witnesses. No camera footage from the barber shop. The system had been unplugged overnight. The repair would cost $1,200 he didn't have. He sat on the curb, glass crunching under his boots, and opened the recipe book. The pages fell to an entry near the back, one he'd never tried. His grandmother's handwriting, faded blue ink. The forgiveness stew, for when the family breaks apart and needs something warm to bring them back. Before he could read the ingredients, Dorothy appeared with a foil-wrapped plate of biscuits. Then the construction worker with a toolbox. Then the bodega owner with a broom and dustpan. Then the barbershop owner with a roll of plastic sheeting and duct tape. Then a woman Harrison had never met, carrying a jar of homemade stock and a card signed by 36 neighbors. The card read, "This corner needs you. Don't let anyone take that away." By noon, the window was patched. By evening, 22 people had contributed to an online fundraiser Elena set up. By midnight, the fund had crossed $8,000, enough for a new window, new tires, and a fresh coat of paint. Harrison stood in the truck that night, alone, the plastic sheeting rattling in the wind. He pressed his palm flat against the recipe book and made himself a promise. Not a promise of revenge, Not a promise to destroy Vincent Calloway. A quieter promise, the kind his grandmother would have recognized. He would let the food speak, and when it spoke, it would say everything he never could. The next morning, a woman in a gray coat ordered the brisket plate. She ate every bite, asked no questions, and left no name. Harrison didn't think much of it. He should have. That woman had given stars to restaurants across 4 continents, and she had never once trembled while eating. Until now. The fundraiser gave Harrison enough to fix the truck, but Elena had a bigger idea. 3 blocks from the food truck, on the corner of Myrtle and Carlton, an old Italian bakery had been sitting empty for 14 months. The owner had died, the family had moved to Connecticut, and the landlord was looking for anyone willing to sign a short lease on a space that still smelled like flour and regret. Elena negotiated. 6 months, below market rate, with an option to extend. Harrison walked through the front door and stood in the middle of the empty room. The floor was checkered black and white tile, chipped at the edges. The kitchen in the back had 2 working ovens, a 6-burner stove with cast iron grates, and a walk-in cooler that hummed like it had been waiting for someone to care. "It's not Le Ciel," Elena said. "Good," Harrison replied. "I don't want Le Ciel." He turned it into a pop-up. No reservations, no dress code, no menu printed on heavy cardstock. Just a chalkboard on the sidewalk that read, "Nana's Kitchen. Dinner Thursday through Sunday, 6 to 10. Come hungry, leave full." The first Thursday, 43 people showed up. By the second week, they had to turn people away at the door. Harrison cooked everything himself, appetizers, mains, desserts, while Elena ran the front. The food was Southern at its roots, but modern in its reach. Smoked short ribs with a bourbon glaze and roasted root vegetables. Shrimp and grits reimagined with aged cheddar and a saffron broth. A cornbread soufflé that rose so high it looked like it was trying to escape the ramekin. People didn't just eat, they talked. Strangers shared tables because there weren't enough to go around. And by the end of the meal, they were exchanging phone numbers. A couple who had been fighting in the car on the way over held hands by dessert. A man who hadn't spoken to his brother in 4 years called him from the sidewalk outside and said, "I just ate something that made me miss you." Harrison heard these stories secondhand, through Elena, through the servers they eventually hired, through the handwritten notes people left on the tables. He never asked for them. But they mattered. They mattered because they proved what Ruth Drake had always told him. Food isn't fuel. Food is a bridge. You cook it right, and people walk across it to find each other. On a Sunday morning in May, Harrison started a free cooking class for kids in the neighborhood. He cleared the dining room, set up folding tables, and laid out cutting boards, mixing bowls, and ingredients bought from the bodega down the street. 8 children signed up the first week, 12 the next. By the 4th week, 23 kids were showing up every Sunday at 10, wearing aprons Harrison had sewn from leftover tablecloths. One of them was Jalen Carter. 12 years old, quiet, skinny arms, oversized hoodie, sneakers held together with duct tape. He lived with his aunt in the Whitman houses after his mother went to prison and his father disappeared into a bottle. Jalen didn't smile much. He didn't talk much either. But he listened like his life depended on it. The first time Jalen held a knife, his hand shook. "It's okay," Harrison said, kneeling beside him. "Hold it gentle, like you're holding a baby bird. Tight enough it don't fly away. Loose enough it can still breathe." The words came out before Harrison realized he was quoting his grandmother exactly. The same words, the same cadence, the same steady voice. He paused, and for a moment the bakery kitchen dissolved and he was 6 years old again, standing on a step stool in Greenville, Mississippi, with Ruth Drake's hand over his.
Jalen looked up. "Who taught you that?"
Someone who loved me very much. Jalen came every Sunday after that. Then he started coming on Thursdays to watch dinner service from the kitchen doorway. Then Fridays. Then every night the pop-up was open. Harrison gave him small tasks, washing herbs, measuring flour, stirring sauces under supervision. The boy absorbed everything. He didn't ask why. He just did.
One evening, after the last table had been cleared and Jalen was wiping down the counters,
Harrison pulled the recipe book from its shelf. He turned to the page he'd found the night his truck window was smashed. The forgiveness stew. The recipe was unlike anything else in the book. Most of Ruth's entries were precise. Measurements, temperatures, times. But this one read more like a letter. The ingredients were listed not by quantity, but by purpose. 1 onion, because every good thing starts with tears. 3 cloves of garlic, because forgiveness needs to be strong enough to taste. Bone broth, slow simmered, because healing takes time you can't rush. Sweet potato, because even broken ground grows something worth eating. A handful of fresh thyme, because time is all we really need. Harrison read it 3 times. Then he gathered the ingredients and cooked.
Elena arrived around 9.
She smelled it before she saw it. A deep, amber fragrance that filled the room like a hymn. She stood in the kitchen doorway and watched Harrison ladle the stew into 2 bowls. He handed her one without a word. She tasted it, set the spoon down, pressed both palms flat on the counter, said nothing for a long time. "Harrison?" "Yeah?" "That's not food. That's a memory. I just tasted my grandmother's house, and she's been dead for 15 years. They sat across from each other at the counter, finishing the stew in silence. The recipe book lay open between them, Ruth's handwriting catching the overhead light. Harrison ran his thumb across the page and felt the indentation of her pen. The physical weight of a woman who had poured her entire life into 96 pages so that her grandson would never have to cook alone. The book had been a keepsake when she gave it to him. Then it became a survival manual when he had nothing. Now, sitting in this borrowed bakery with food on the stove and a boy named Jalen learning to hold a knife the way he once had, the book was becoming something else entirely. A legacy. Harrison didn't know that Margaret Cole had already visited 3 times. The woman in the gray coat. She had come as a regular customer. No reservation, no fanfare, always alone, always at the corner table nearest the kitchen. She ordered different dishes each time and ate with a focus that most people mistook for hunger. It wasn't hunger, it was assessment. She carried a small leather notebook of her own, and she wrote in it after every bite, with the same precision Ruth Drake had used to document her recipes. On her 3rd visit, Margaret ordered the forgiveness stew. It had been added to the chalkboard menu that week, Harrison's first time serving it publicly. She lifted the spoon, brought it to her lips, and her hand stopped midway. Not from hesitation, from recognition. Something in that stew reached past her professional palate and touched a part of her she kept locked away during inspections. She ate the entire bowl. Then she sat for 11 minutes without moving. When she finally stood, she walked to the counter where Harrison was plating desserts, took his hand in both of hers, and said 5 words. "Your grandmother would be proud." Harrison watched her leave. He didn't know her name. He didn't know she had awarded and revoked more Michelin stars than any active inspector in North America. He didn't know that her notebook now contained 4 pages about his food, more than she had written about any single restaurant in the past 3 years. All he knew was that a stranger had held his hand and spoken about his grandmother as if she could feel her in the food. And for the first time since Ruth died, Harrison believed that maybe she could. Vincent Calloway announced the NYC Culinary Championship on a Tuesday morning in September. A live cooking competition hosted at Le Ciel, broadcast on the city's top food network, with 6 of New York's most decorated chefs competing for a $50,000 prize and a feature spread in Culinary Arts magazine. Vincent would serve as both host and final competitor, the reigning champion defending his kitchen, his reputation, and his Michelin star. The announcement made every food blog in the city within hours. The lineup was a who's who of professional cooking. Executive chefs from 4-star restaurants, James Beard nominees, graduates of Le Cordon Bleu and the Culinary Institute of America. Every name carried credentials heavy enough to fill a resume. Elena saw the announcement and drove straight to the pop-up. "You should enter," she said. Harrison was elbow-deep in a pot of gumbo. "Why?" "Because you're better than all of them, and you know it." "I don't have a degree. I don't have a restaurant. I have a bakery with a short lease and a food truck with new tires." "You have your grandmother's book. That's worth more than any diploma hanging on their walls." Harrison stirred the gumbo. He didn't answer for a long time. Then he dried his hands, opened the recipe book, and turned to the first page. Ruth's handwriting, faded but certain. "Cook with love. Always." He registered the next morning. When Vincent saw Harrison's name on the contestant list, he laughed. Not a private laugh, a public one, captured on camera during a pre-event press conference. A reporter had asked about the competition's diversity of talent. "Diverse?" Vincent leaned into the microphone, grinning. "We've got a dishwasher who thinks he's a chef. That's diverse, right?" The room laughed. Vincent kept going. "Harrison Drake washed my pots for 3 years. Never once saw him do anything useful with a stove. But hey, everyone deserves a chance to embarrass themselves on television." The clip aired on 3 networks. It trended for 2 days. The comments split down the middle, half mocking Harrison, half rooting for him. #dishwasherchef became a hashtag before the competition even started. The day arrived. A Saturday in late October. Le Ciel's main dining room had been converted into an arena. 6 cooking stations arranged in a horseshoe, cameras mounted at every angle, a panel of 3 judges seated behind a long table draped in white linen. The audience held 200 people. Every seat was taken. Harrison walked in through the service entrance, the same door he'd been thrown out of 7 months earlier. He wore a clean white chef's coat Elena had bought for him. No logo, no embroidery. Just white cotton and 2 pockets. In the left pocket, the wooden spoon. In the right, a folded page from the recipe book. Vincent spotted him from across the room and smirked. "Welcome back to my kitchen, dishwasher. Try not to break anything." Harrison said nothing. He unpacked his knives and set them on the magnetic strip. His hands were steady. Round 1. Appetizer. 30 minutes. The other chefs reached for imported ingredients. Truffle oil, saffron threads, uni from Hokkaido. Harrison reached for a sweet potato. He roasted it over an open flame until the skin blackened and cracked, scooped the flesh into a bowl, whipped it with brown butter and a whisper of cayenne, piped it onto a crostini, and finished it with a microgreen salad dressed in lemon and honey. The judges tasted each plate in silence. When they reached Harrison's, the first judge, a retired executive chef from Chicago, closed her eyes while chewing. The second judge set his fork down and wrote 3 words on his notepad. The third judge looked at Harrison and asked, "Where did you learn to balance heat like that?" "My grandmother's kitchen, Greenville, Mississippi." Round 2, main course, 45 minutes. This was where Vincent made his move. Harrison's station had been pre-stocked with premium proteins: lamb rack, duck breast, Wagyu strip. But when Harrison opened his cooler, the lamb had been swapped for a tough, gristly shoulder cut. The duck was a day past its prime. The Wagyu was gone entirely, replaced with a chuck steak that a grocery store would have marked down for quick sale. Harrison looked at the ingredients. He looked at Vincent, 3 stations away, focused on his own lamb rack with exaggerated concentration. He understood. He didn't complain. He didn't raise his hand. He didn't signal the judges. He picked up the chuck steak and held it to the light, turning it slowly, reading its grain the way his grandmother had taught him to read every piece of meat, not by its label, but by its truth. "Every cut has a story," Ruth used to say. "Expensive meat tells you it's good. Cheap meat makes you prove you're good enough." Harrison broke the chuck down into medallions. He salted them heavy, let them rest, then seared them in a cast-iron pan so hot the oil sang. He braised the gristly shoulder low and slow in red wine with rosemary, turning sinew into silk. He built a jus from the fond, deglazed with bourbon, and mounted it with cold butter until it gleamed. He plated the dish with roasted carrots from his station's vegetable box and a smear of parsnip puree so smooth it looked like cream. The judges tasted Vincent's lamb first. It was technically flawless. Precise temperature, clean sauce, architectural plating. They nodded. They wrote notes. They moved on. When they tasted Harrison's chuck steak, the room shifted. The first judge chewed slowly, her eyebrows rising with each second. The second judge put his pen down entirely and leaned back in his chair. The third judge, the one who'd asked about heat, took a second bite without being prompted. In 42 competitions, he had never done that. Not once. He looked at Harrison the way a man looks at something he didn't believe was possible until it was sitting on his tongue. "This was chuck steak?" he asked. "Yes, chef." "How?" Harrison glanced at his wooden spoon resting beside the cutting board. "I listened to it." A murmur rippled through the audience. 200 people leaned forward in their seats. Round 3. Dessert. 30 minutes. Harrison didn't hesitate. He opened the folded page from his right pocket, the forgiveness stew, and adapted it. Sweet potato custard with bone broth caramel, thyme-infused cream, and a crumble made from brown butter cornbread. A deconstructed version of his grandmother's most personal recipe, rebuilt as a dessert that honored every ingredient's original purpose. Vincent prepared a classic creme brulee with gold leaf and an espresso tuile. Perfect technique, impeccable presentation, and completely soulless. The judges tasted Harrison's dessert last. The first judge's spoon stopped halfway to her mouth. She brought it the rest of the way slowly, as if she already knew what was about to happen. She tasted it, set the spoon down, removed her glasses, and pressed her fingertips against her eyes. The second judge ate the entire portion without writing a single note. When he finished, he folded his hands on the table and stared at his empty plate as though it had just told him a secret. The third judge stood up from his chair, walked around the table, and extended his hand to Harrison. "Young man, I've judged 42 competitions. I've never tasted anything like that." The scores were announced. Harrison Drake, first place, unanimous. Vincent's face went white, then red, then a shade that had no name. He slammed both palms on his station counter, hard enough to rattle every pan in the room. His sous chef stepped back. A camera operator flinched. "This is a fraud," he shouted into the nearest camera. "He's a dishwasher. He has no training, no credentials, no right to be here. He learned to cook from some old woman in Mississippi. That's not cuisine, that's charity. I demand a review. I demand—" "Chef Calloway,"
The voice came from the back of the room. Calm, measured, absolute. Everyone turned. A woman in a gray coat stood up from her seat in the last row. She had been there the entire competition, watching, writing in a small leather notebook, saying nothing. No one had paid her any attention. They were all about to. Margaret Cole walked down the center aisle of Le Ciel's dining room with the unhurried pace of a woman who had spent 31 years entering restaurants and leaving them changed. The audience parted slightly in their seats as she passed, though they didn't know why. Something about the way she commanded space without asking for it. She stopped 3 feet from Vincent Calloway's station. The cameras swiveled to follow her. "My name is Margaret Cole," she said. Her voice carried no amplification, but it reached every corner of the room. "I am a senior inspector for the Michelin Guide, North American Division. I have been conducting an unannounced evaluation of this establishment and its affiliated operations for the past 3 months." The silence that followed was so complete that Harrison could hear the hum of the refrigeration unit behind the wall. Vincent's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Margaret turned to face the judges' table, the cameras, and the 200 people sitting in stunned stillness. She opened her leather notebook, the same one she had been writing in at Harrison's pop-up, at the food truck, and now here, in the building where it all began. "During my evaluation period, I made 4 visits to Le Ciel as an anonymous diner. I also made 3 visits to an independent pop-up restaurant operated by Mr. Harrison Drake, and 1 visit to his food truck." She turned a page. "My findings are as follows." She looked directly at Vincent. "Le Ciel is in violation of 7 Michelin operational standards. My inspections revealed the reuse of expired shellfish stock in 3 separate preparations. Mislabeled sourcing on your menu. Your Dover sole is farm-raised Pangasius. Your grass-fed Angus has been commodity beef for at least 6 months. I also documented a pattern of workplace harassment, including the public humiliation and wrongful termination of a kitchen staff member. An event I was able to verify through multiple employee testimonies." Vincent gripped the edge of his station counter. His knuckles turned the color of bone. "Effective immediately," Margaret continued, "Le Ciel's Michelin star is suspended, pending a formal review that I expect will result in permanent revocation." A gasp moved through the audience like a wave. Phones rose. Cameras flashed. The Food Network director whispered frantically into his headset. Vincent found his voice. It came out cracked and raw. "You can't do this. I've had that star for 11 years. I built this restaurant from nothing. I am Vincent Calloway." "You are a chef who substitutes fraud for integrity and cruelty for leadership," Margaret said. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "A Michelin star is not a trophy, Chef Calloway. It is a trust. And you have broken it." Vincent turned to the judges, to the audience, to anyone who might offer rescue. "This is a setup. She's working with him." He pointed at Harrison. "The dishwasher and the inspector. It's a conspiracy." "Chef Calloway?" A new voice. Elena Whitfield stepped out from behind the service bar where she had been watching in silence. Behind her stood 2 line cooks, James Bennett and Tyler Reed, both of whom had worked at Le Ciel for over 4 years. "I traced the anonymous health complaints filed against Harrison's food truck," Elena said. "They came from an email registered to Le Ciel's business account. Your business account, Vincent." James Bennett spoke next. His voice was quiet but unshaking. He called Harrison the N-word in the walk-in cooler. Twice. I heard it both times. I said nothing because I was afraid of losing my job. Tyler Reed nodded. He told me once that black hands don't belong in a French kitchen.
His exact words.
The room didn't gasp this time. It held its breath. Vincent's face collapsed, not in anger, in recognition. The recognition of a man watching every lie, every cruelty, every shortcut he had ever taken walk into the light at the same time. His mouth worked silently. His hands dropped to his sides. For the first time in his career, Chef Vincent Calloway had nothing to plate, nothing to present, and no one to blame but himself. Margaret Cole turned to Harrison. Mr. Drake, I have eaten in restaurants across 40 countries over 3 decades. I have awarded stars, and I have taken them away. I do not use the word extraordinary lightly. She paused. Your food is extraordinary, not because of your technique, though your technique is remarkable. Because your food carries something I cannot teach, cannot train, and cannot manufacture. It carries the soul. It carries history. It carries the hands of everyone who ever loved you. She reached into her coat and produced an envelope. This is a formal invitation from the Michelin Guide to participate in our Emerging Chef Recognition Program. It includes funding support for a permanent restaurant, mentorship from our network of starred chefs, and a formal evaluation for your first Michelin star within 12 months. Harrison took the envelope. His fingers trembled, not from nerves, but from the weight of what he was holding. Not money, not fame. Permission. Permission to be what he had always been. The host handed him a microphone. Harrison looked at it, then at the room full of cameras and phones and faces, some stunned, some moved, some crying. He thought about what to say. He thought about all the things he could say, about the apron ripped from his neck, the glass in the sidewalk, the anonymous complaints, the switched ingredients. He could have buried Vincent Calloway right there, on live television, with the truth. Instead, he said this: I didn't come here to destroy anyone. I came here because my grandmother told me that food is how we forgive. She said the best meals aren't the ones that cost the most or take the longest. The best meals are the ones that bring people back to the table. People who left, people who were pushed away, people who forgot they were welcome. That's what I cook. That's all I know how to cook. And if that's enough, then I'm grateful. If it's not, I'll keep cooking until it is. He set the microphone down. The room stood. Every person, every judge, every camera operator and server and stranger who had walked in expecting entertainment and received something they would carry home in their chest like a second heartbeat. Even Vincent Calloway, still standing at his station with nothing left, lowered his head. Not because anyone made him, because for the first time, he understood that the man he had called a dishwasher had just done something he never could. He had fed a room full of people without putting a single plate on the table. 1 year later, on a Friday evening in October, Harrison Drake stood in the kitchen of Nana's table and listened to the sound of a full dining room. Not the muffled roar of Le Ciel's polished clientele. This was different. This was laughter that bounced off exposed brick walls, forks scraping against plates that didn't match, children's voices threading through the conversation like instruments in a jazz band that nobody was conducting, but everybody could hear. The restaurant occupied the ground floor of a restored brownstone on DeKalb Avenue in Fort Greene, 4 blocks from where the food truck had parked, 6 blocks from the bakery pop-up, and a lifetime away from the dish pit at Le Ciel. Elena had found the space. Margaret Cole's funding program had secured the lease. Harrison had designed every inch of the interior himself. There were no white tablecloths, no gold leaf on the dessert plates, no sommelier circling with a leather-bound wine list. Instead, there were communal oak tables that Harrison had sanded by hand, mismatched chairs collected from estate sales across Brooklyn,
and a chalkboard menu that changed every week based on what was fresh, what was in season, and what Ruth Drake's recipe book told him needed to be cooked next. The kitchen was open. Not open concept for aesthetic purposes. Open because Harrison believed that cooking should never happen behind a wall. He wanted his guests to see the fire, smell the smoke, hear the sizzle of butter hitting cast iron. He wanted them to know that their food was being made by human hands, not assembled by a machine wearing a chef's coat. Jalen Carter stood at Station 2, closest to the pass. 13 now, taller by 3 inches, wearing a chef's coat with his name embroidered on the chest, a birthday gift from Harrison. He worked the appetizer line with a focus that would have impressed cooks twice his age. His knife work was clean. His timing was precise. His hands no longer shook. Harrison watched him plate a sweet potato crostini, the same dish that had stunned the judges at the championship, and felt something settle in his chest that he hadn't felt in years. Not pride, exactly. Something deeper. The feeling of watching a thing you love continue in someone else's hands. Nana's table was more than a restaurant. 3 mornings a week, before service prep began, Harrison ran the Nana's Kitchen Youth Culinary Program. 12 students, ages 11 to 17, all from the neighborhood, all selected on a single criterion. Not talent, not grades, not behavior reports. Just hunger. Not the kind that food fixes, the kind that drives a person to learn something so thoroughly that it becomes part of who they are. He taught them the way Ruth had taught him. No textbooks, no written exams, just hands in flour, noses over steam, ears tuned to the sound of oil finding its voice. He taught them that a sharp knife is safer than a dull one, that salt isn't a flavor, it's an amplifier, that the difference between a good cook and a great one is the willingness to stand at the stove for 10 more minutes when every part of your body wants to walk away. 4 of his first 12 students had been accepted into culinary programs across the city. 1 had received a full scholarship to the Culinary Institute of America, the same school whose graduates had competed against Harrison and lost. The recipe book sat in a glass case mounted on the wall beside the kitchen pass. Ruth Drake's 96 pages of handwritten wisdom, preserved under museum-grade glass, lit by a single warm light that made the faded blue ink glow. Guests stopped to read it on their way to the restroom. Some took photos. Some stood there for minutes, reading the ingredient lists that were really love letters, the cooking instructions that were really life instructions. But the recipes themselves were not locked away. Harrison had scanned every page and uploaded them to a free website, nanaskitchenrecipes.com, where anyone, anywhere, could download Ruth Drake's life's work and cook from it. The site had been live for 6 months. It had been visited 400,000 times. People from 31 countries had made the forgiveness stew and posted photos of it online, each one different, each one carrying a piece of a woman they had never met but somehow recognized. On a Thursday evening in November, Margaret Cole walked through the front door of Nana's table. This time, she did not come alone. 2 inspectors accompanied her, both carrying leather notebooks of their own. She wore the same gray coat. She sat at the same corner table. She ordered the forgiveness stew. When the meal was finished, Margaret stood and walked to the kitchen pass. Harrison was plating desserts, Jalen at his side, both of them moving in the synchronized rhythm of 2 people who understood each other without speaking. "Mr. Drake," Margaret said. She placed a small envelope on the pass. "It's official." Harrison opened it. Inside was a single card, embossed with the Michelin crest. 1 star. Nana's table. The youngest black chef in New York history to receive the honor. He read it twice. Then he turned to Jalen. "Hold this," he said, handing the boy the card. Jalen looked at it. His eyes widened. Chef, this is yours to see, so you know what's possible. Elena appeared at the pass, having heard the news from the front. She didn't say anything. She put her hand on Harrison's shoulder and squeezed once. That was enough. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived at the restaurant. No return address. Harrison opened it at his desk after service, alone. The handwriting was stiff, formal, the kind that comes from a hand unaccustomed to apology. Harrison, I won't ask for your forgiveness because I don't deserve it. I treated you like you were less than nothing, and you responded by becoming more than I ever was. I closed Le Ciel last month. I'm not writing to tell you that. I'm writing because I need you to know that I hear your grandmother in your food. I don't know how that's possible, but I do. Vincent Calloway. Harrison read the letter. He folded it carefully along its original creases. He opened the glass case on the wall, placed the letter inside next to the recipe book, and closed the door. Some things belong together. Cruelty and grace. The wound and the healing. The hand that tore the apron, and the hand that kept cooking anyway. On a Sunday morning in December, Harrison stood at the long table in the dining room, 19 young cooks around him, aprons tied, knives ready. Jalen was at the head of the table, reading aloud from a laminated copy of Ruth Drake's recipe for the forgiveness stew. 1 onion, Jalen read, because every good thing starts with tears. Harrison listened. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed, the wooden spoon tucked into his apron pocket, the way his grandmother used to carry it. The morning light came through the front windows and fell across the table in long golden bars, catching the flour dust that hung in the air like something almost sacred. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The food was speaking. It had always been speaking, and now, finally, the whole world could hear it. If this story moved you, leave a comment. Tell us about someone in your life who never got the credit they deserved. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you haven't already, subscribe, because every week we bring you stories of people who were told they'd never make it and proved everyone wrong.
So, the man who got his apron ripped off his neck and was told he'll never cook just became the youngest black chef in New York history to earn a Michelin star. And Vincent, he closed Le Ciel and wrote Harrison a letter saying he could hear his grandmother in the food. But here's what really got me. Harrison didn't win because he destroys Vincent. He won because he never stopped being who his grandmother raised him to be. 96 pages that the old Ruth Drake left him, received coldness, Monday curry soup, and the forgiveness stew. No degree, no connections, just a wooden spoon and the belief that food is a bridge. They smashed his truck window. The neighborhood shows up. They switched his ingredients. He turned the truck steak into something that made a judge take a second bite for the first time in 42 competitions. That's not luck. That's a legacy. Real talk. How many Harrisons are out there right now, washing somebody's dishes, knowing they belong at the stove? We've all been in that kitchen, either as Harrison or as one of your 12 cooks who watches and said nothing. Drop a comment. Who in your life never got the credit they deserve? If this hit you, like, share, and subscribe. Next week's story might be even wider. Cook with love, always. Grandma Rose said it best.